Okay, happy Earth Day, everyone. And I see there are people still joining, but we're going to get started with the introduction. So again, welcome to another Chmura webinar, especially if it's your first time with us. A very hearty welcome. We're happy to have you here. My name is Avery, and I am on the marketing team here at Chmura. And I'm just going to give a little introduction, go through some logistics before we get down to the good stuff. So if you have watched with us before, welcome back. We love to see when people, keep coming back to webinars. We've been doing them for the past year. And yeah, it's a nice little webinar community with people who care about using data to help their organizations. But if in case it's your first time and you're wondering, what is Chmura? I got forwarded this invite. Here's where we're going to let you know. So we are a company that provides labor market data and analysis so that you can make informed decisions that help your organization grow, that help your region thrive. We help workforce, site selectors, economic developers, educators, corporate clients, you name it. Everyone needs data. We were founded in 1998 by Christine Chmura, who is one of our speakers today, which is very exciting. And now we've grown to about 45 professionals in Richmond, Cleveland, and Dallas. We are economists, data scientists, statisticians, and business professionals who care about helping you grow your community by using data. And so our top priority really is client satisfaction and excellence. That's something we're talking about every day. We care about excellence in data quality and in customer service. And so how do we help people understand labor market data and analysis? Well, one way is, I'm going to talk about the weekly economic update in a second, but one way is through our JobsEQ software tools, which are the best labor market analysis tools on the market. We recently released 4 new products. JobsEQ Pro, which gives you data down to the census block level. We've also got JobsEQ for education, JobsEQ for workforce, and JobsEQ for economic development. So these tools really give you timely, accurate data and analytics that help you make sense. It's not just a data dump, but it helps you make sense of the information you're seeing so that you can create a strategic plan, help your community grow. And so if you don't have the time or resources to really get your hands in the data with our software, we have a consulting team who can help you create a strategic plan, do a target industry study, a strategic plan, and we are really happy to perform that analysis for you. And so what you're seeing on the screen right now is, maybe it's not the right time for you to buy our software or our consulting. At Chmura, we still believe that everyone deserves access to high quality economic analysis, which is why we offer a lot of resources for free. So we have webinars like this one. We have a podcast, Chmura Economics at Work. Find it wherever podcasts are found. And we have the weekly economic update. And so if you look in the chat bar, you can click on that link to sign up for our weekly economic update. It's just a really great national overview that arrives in your inbox every weekend. It's written by our economists here at Chmura. And so if you don't want to check the news over the weekend, you don't have to. Just check your inbox. We are happy to give you an overview of the economy. So now a few logistics things. Please type your questions in the chat. And if we have time, we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. I will collect the questions. Also, everyone who registered for the webinar will get the PowerPoint, and they'll also get a recording. So you can, share it with your boss if you would like to. And so we're getting close to the real content. I'm going to introduce our speakers. First, we've got Dr. Chmura. She is the founder and CEO of Chmura Economics and Analytics. She is a national thought leader on labor economics, and her passion is helping people use economic data to help their communities and organizations grow. She is a quoted source on regional and national trends, and she's also a member of the Blue Chip Financial Forecasters. And since the beginning of COVID, she's been hosting these webinars and telling us, what to expect from the economy. And today, she is joined for the first time on one of these webinars by one of our own economists, Jonathan Cox. He is an economist on our JobsEQ software side. And in this webinar, he is going to be taking a deep dive into the definitions and the data and the application of green occupations. He holds a bachelor's degree in business economics and public policy from Brown University and a master's degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin. And when he's not busy with data, he enjoys chess and trombone. So we've got some very smart and very fun people who are excited to talk to you today about green occupations. Again, type any questions you have in the chat. And Chris, over to you. Let's get started.
Thanks, Avery. And yes, happy Earth Day to everyone. We're talking about the greening of the economy in this webinar. But before we do that, I just want to give you a quick overview on the national progress regarding the pandemic and coming out of it. We're seeing some really encouraging economic trends, and we're seeing progress toward herd immunity. I'll give you some background on the model that we're using and tracking over time. I'll talk about the Biden administration policies. In particular, the infrastructure plan addresses climate change, and we'll go over some of the high-level things that he's looking at there. And then Jonathan will be here to talk to you about green occupations and JobsEQ. As Avery said, first looking at the definition, then the process, how did we incorporate green occupations into JobsEQ, and then the application of how you can use these green occupations in your region. So beginning first with the national overview. Again, we've been updating these slides if you've been at our previous webinars. And pre-COVID, the economy was fundamentally strong. These gray shaded areas are recessions. And there's a group in the US called the National Bureau of Economic Research that define recession dates, not by just looking at GDP, but looking at other monthly data. And here are three of the indicators they look at. First, employment. You can see employment was rising. As soon as we went into the recession, COVID lockdown, we lost all the jobs created over the prior expansion. We've seen a rebound, a little bit of a slowdown, but then the latest data in March showed an uptick almost of 1 million jobs. Now that some people are getting vaccinated, we've seen some of the businesses hardest hit opening back up, and we'd expect to continue to see a sharp rebound here. On the right-hand side, we're looking at personal income and consumption. So that's consumer spending and consumer income. It's very important because they make up about 70% of GDP. So consumption or spending is basically spending on goods and services. You see the plummet when we were told to stay at home, a faster than expected rebound based on what economists were looking for. And then we had a little bit of a dip, an increase, but again, a little bit of a dip in March because of some of the weather. The retail sales, which is a component of this that just came out, show some very, very strong growth at the department stores and other retail establishments. Industrial production, here we're looking at output of factories, utilities, and mining. And again, a huge drop going into the recession, a nice rebound. This is indexed to 100 here. So you can see the rebound. It dropped again because of the bad weather we had a month or so ago, and then it's been coming back up. So overall, we're seeing some very encouraging signs, especially on the consumer side in increasing the purchases on the factory side in terms of starting to grow again. When we look at GDP, so the broadest indicator of economic activity, here you see the decline in GDP was much greater than what we saw in the Great Recession. First quarter was off nearly 5% annualized, 30% in the second quarter, but then the rebound was just as strong, around 30%, just a little bit less than 5% here in the fourth quarter. First quarter, we're looking for something just a little under 5%, but then going forward, looking at 5%, maybe a little over that. Anything above 2% is considered very good growth. So just based on the economy coming back, we would expect the second half of this year to be very strong, and then into 2022 to be very strong. And depending on, again, the next stimulus package, if it's passed, some of that strength trickling over into 2023 before we return back to more normal levels of growth, which would be 2% or low. On the employment side, it's going to be slower in coming back because people are not going to get back out and spending money as freely as they were in the past until we see herd immunity. So how do we get to that point? We've developed a model to look at it, and it relies, of course, on how many cases we are currently seeing. And so here you see the big increase due to the holidays, Thanksgiving, December, but then the numbers came down substantially. It increased slightly again, which took us back to levels that we saw last summer, and that being due in part to spring break. But again, the numbers are coming down a bit. So we are economists, not medical practitioners. And so our forecast is relying in part on the projections made by the University of Washington. So here you see the number of infections peaking around December, January 2021, coming down, a little bit of an increase, and then you see their projection for infections to continue to decrease. So again, this is what we're relying on, and it's interesting. As economists, we have assumptions in our model, but never before this pandemic did we ever use health issues in the U.S. to drive our forecasts. We usually use what our interest rate's going to do, how fast will the Fed raise rates, what is inflation going to do, or what about the price of oil, how fast will it go up. But right now, this is the main driver of our modeling. So, and if you want to read in more detail about the assumptions in this model, we have a blog that you can go to if you just put in Chmura and herd immunity and blog. We have 3 scenarios, and as we've gone over time, if you've been in our previous webinars, you notice that these lines are converging. When there was more uncertainty, say back a few months, the likely was a lot more distant from the most likely. So we have the most likely expectation, which is, again, based on what you see from the University of Washington, as well as the number of people that have the virus, assume that they're immune for 6 months, so they roll on or off, getting again to 80% herd immunity. Based on the latest numbers, it looks like for the U.S. overall, we'll be there in August. The pessimistic scenario is not too far behind that, somewhere in late September, October. But again, all of this depends on the assumptions. So 600 million total vaccines purchased from Moderna, 200 million from Johnson & Johnson, which is the single dose. Of course, that's been delayed, but we assume that that will not be delayed forever. And so that at this point is not having a significant impact on our model. As of April 21st, over 134 million Americans received a single dose. That's 40%. 87 million fully vaccinated. That's 26%. On average, administering 3 million doses per day. To give you a sense, baseline for that, we started the year at 1 million doses per day, and some of the medical practitioners were saying that they didn't believe we'd ever get to 3 million. So clearly we're at that point. Again, we're assuming 80% is the threshold for herd immunity, and Kaiser has been doing a survey. As of their last survey that's been posted in February, 79% of individuals say that they will get the vaccine. That has been going up. We also assume the vaccines maintain high levels of efficacy against new and existing variants. So if any of those assumptions change, clearly that will have an impact on our model, and we're closely monitoring this so that we can continue to give you an updated model at these webinars. So how does it look by state? The green states are those that are seeing faster move toward herd immunity. The darker blue, a slower move toward it, with New Mexico, Northeast, and North Central U.S. are leading the nation in the timeline. And so in terms of our most likely scenario, the dark green are expected to get to herd immunity by July or in July. The green, the preponderance of all the states, in August, the light blue in September, and 2 states lagging in dark blue, looking for an October herd immunity date. So one other item here before getting to the Biden administration is a lot of people have been asking about teleworking. So the Department of Labor put a question in their survey about how many people have teleworked in the past 4 weeks due to the pandemic. You could see in July it was at 26%, came down, then went back up when the virus was increasing or starting to spread more, and now we're down to 21%, the lowest level that we've seen since the pandemic started. And here is a nice article that was in the New York Times a couple of days ago, looking at migration trends. And so we've heard a lot about people migrating into different areas. And the bottom line of this article, using some data from the U.S. Postal Service, is that most of the migration is coming out of either New York City or San Francisco. We're not seeing it across all metropolitan areas, and a lot of that is going into the suburbs around those 2 areas. So again, just an article that I found to be very interesting, and I thought you might as well. So when you get the PowerPoint deck, you may want to click on that and take a look at it. Now to the Biden administration. His plan, the American Jobs Plan, a $2 trillion infrastructure proposal that also seeks to get to net zero carbon emission by 2050. And apparently today, and he may have already made an announcement about some more plans around getting reducing carbon emission. Again, if he hasn't made that announcement yet, he's expected to later today. So one of the things in this American Jobs Plan is that he wants to boost the electric vehicle market. And he's putting $174 billion toward this to prioritize a national electric vehicle charging network. So he has grant and incentive programs for charging infrastructure. This may be hard to achieve based on some of the current information we have. The 10-minute charging stations cost $120,000 to $260,000 to install. Right now, we've got 41,400 electric vehicle charging stations in the U.S. based on Department of Energy information. Only 5,000 are fast chargers. By comparison, we've got over 136,000 gas stations in the U.S. So clearly, it's not as convenient to drive an electric vehicle than it is gas-powered vehicles. In terms of the market that they make up today, electric vehicles and hybrids account for about 2% of vehicles sold in 2019. So the $174 billion also has some funding to retool factories and provide tax incentives for electric vehicle buyers. Secondly, he wants to update the electric grids, and he's setting aside about $100 billion for that. He wants the electric grids to be more resilient to climate disasters. An example is what we saw in Texas just a couple of months ago. So he wants to make sure that that doesn't happen in other areas around the country. And the plan calls to replace lead pipes. That is all lead pipes in the country. Also in this plan, he provides technologies to mitigate climate change, $35 billion to go toward R&D for technologies to mitigate climate change and to create jobs. And the areas would be carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, and electric vehicles. He wants to help fossil fuel workers transition to new jobs, so he's providing $16 billion to curb methane leaks, to cap oil gas wells, and to reclaim old mines. And then finally, part of the money is to establish a civilian climate corps. And here he's providing $10 billion to employ people to restore land. So those are some of the high-level things that the Biden administration at this point is planning. And again, he may make some more announcements today. And the Civilian Climate Corps is based on the Civilian Conservation Corps from the 1930s. So how are we going to pay for all this? He has, within that plan, suggested eliminating subsidies and tax credits for fossil fuel producers. However, the bulk of the plan is expected to be paid for by increasing corporate tax rate to 28%. And parenthetically, Trump lowered it to 35% to 21% in 2017. But the White House has been talking to Republicans and others in Congress and the Senate. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on the 20th indicating that the corporate tax rate may only increase to 25% rather than 28%. This is being negotiated. And Republicans favor user fees on individuals that benefit from the infrastructure projects. So, for example, if we have new highways, then you put a toll on those highways so that only people who are using those highways are paying for it with user fees. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jonathan, who will now talk to you about green job occupation groups and JobsEQ by Chmura and how you can use that information in your region.
Hello, everyone. Happy Earth Day from snowy and sunny Cleveland. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to be describing green job occupation groups in JobsEQ.
Hi, Jonathan. Right now we're seeing a swirling circle. So maybe you turn off your screen share and then turn it back on.
Okay.
Okay, I see it now. If you guys see, today we'll cover and some beautiful windmills. Please comment. I see it in the chat, and then we'll keep going.
All right.
Okay,
perfect.
We're good to go.
All right, wonderful. So today I'm going to cover sort of what are green jobs and occupations, at least how we're defining them within JobsEQ. Two, the process we use to incorporate green occupations in JobsEQ. And then three, how you can use JobsEQ to find data regarding green occupations. So within JobsEQ, we have created two green job occupation groups you can search for. Green jobs total and green jobs requiring a high school degree or less. Now, how did we create these two jobs, these two groups? We primarily relied upon a study published by ONET, which is a site hosted by the Department of Labor, to identify which occupations to consider as green. And how did the authors of this study identify green jobs? They relied on this concept called occupational greening to identify it. And this concept takes a more occupation-centric approach than other studies that have attempted to do the same thing in the past. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics green job definition focuses on whether an occupation's output contributes to the green economy. So how occupations affect the green economy. This ONET study that we looked at, however, looked at how the green economy impacts occupations. And the study defined the green economy, or they used the definition, defined the green economy as economic activity related to reducing the use of fossil fuels, decreasing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, increasing the efficiency of energy usage, recycling materials, developing and adopting recycling materials, and developing and adopting renewable sources of energy. And they took this definition of the green economy and broke it out into 12 different sectors, or broke it out into 12 different sectors. And this next slide sort of has a definition of each of those 12 sectors. So you have renewable energy generation, transportation, energy efficiency, green construction, energy trading, energy and carbon capture storage, research, design, and consulting services. And this is sort of an interesting sector because it encompasses indirect jobs in the green economy, which includes activities such as energy consulting or research and other related business services. So this is sort of an interesting sector there. Environmental protection, agriculture and forestry, manufacturing, recycling and waste production, and governmental and regulatory administration. So they took these 12 sectors of the green economy, and within them, they examined sort of how the occupations were being affected by the green economy. And they came up with sort of one of three ways the quote unquote greening of an occupation was occurring. The first was sort of green increased demand occupations. So the impact of the green economy increases the demand for an existing occupation. The work context may change, but the tasks themselves do not. And examples of these could be bus drivers or fish and game wardens. Next, another way the impact was occurring was through green enhanced skills occupations. So here, the impact of the green economy causes a significant change to the work and worker requirements in existing SOC code. And the purpose of the occupation remains the same, but the tasks, skills, and even credentials have changed. Examples of these could be electrical engineers or marketing manager. Finally, you have green, new, and emerging occupation. So here, impact of the green economy is sufficient enough to create the need for unique work and a new SOC code. The occupation could be entirely novel or born from an existing SOC. And examples of these could be wind turbine service technicians or water/wastewater engineers. So the next couple of slides will provide you some more examples of occupations that fall into these three categories. So first up, more examples of green increased demand occupations. And here you see the green SOC code and the SOC title, and then sort of a description of that occupation. And one of the interesting SOCs that's listed here is software developers. And this occupation is part of that research, design, and consulting services sector of the green economy that we were looking at a few slides ago. And if you remember the definition of that, it encompasses indirect jobs in the green economy. So these sort of green increased demand occupations that were identified as green jobs can be kind of interesting there. The next slide provides some more examples of green enhanced skills occupation. And here in this last column, you'll see an example of a new green task associated with these SOC codes or occupations here. For example, a new green task for general and operation managers is to implement or oversee environmental management or sustainability programs addressing issues such as recycling, conservation, or waste management. We look over here at financial analysts. They may now need to forecast or analyze financial costs associated with climate change or other environmental factors, such as clean water supply and demand. And finally, an example of sort of new credentials this category of green occupations might need to obtain can be seen when you look at this occupation architects right there. And they may now need to design structures that incorporate environmentally friendly building practices or concepts such as leadership in energy and environmental design standards, otherwise known as LEED. So that's some examples of some green enhanced skills occupations. The next table here gives you some more examples of green, new, and emerging occupations. So here we look at the first row, green marketers. They one of their green tasks is to develop branding or sales initiatives for green products, such as solar energy systems, green cleaning products, or products using renewable or recycled materials. Another interesting example here is brownfield redevelopment specialists and site managers. A green task they have is to coordinate on-site activities for environmental cleanup or remediation projects to ensure compliance with environmental laws, standards, regulations, or other requirements. And finally, a final example I should talk about is securities and commodities traders here. And they need to identify, or a green task they have is to identify or pursue investment strategies related to the green economy, including green hedge funds, renewable energy markets, or clean technology investment opportunities. So a full list of the occupations that fall into all three categories can be found in the appendix of the study that I mentioned earlier, released that was published by ONET. And if you have the time, I suggest you check it out. It's pretty interesting. And a link to the study was provided on that earlier slide in the deck. And as Avery mentioned, we will be making these slides available after the presentation. So I recommend checking it out if you can. So the next part of my presentation is discussing the process we use to incorporate green occupations in JobsEQ. And admittedly, this discussion might get a bit technical and go into the weeds a bit. So if you're not familiar with some of the things I'm describing, don't worry too much. After this section, I'm going to be talking about how you can use the two green occupation groups we've added to JobsEQ to find information about green jobs in your region. So bear with me through this section, and we'll dive into data after this. All right. So we took the occupations that the ONET study identified as green, which were 2010 8-digit SOCs. And so we took those, so they were 2010 8-digit SOCs, but in 2018, a new edition of SOC codes were released. So one of the first steps we had to take was to crosswalk those 2010 8-digit SOCs here into the 2018 8-digit SOCs. However, work wasn't done there. We then needed to take an additional step and crosswalk these 2018 8-digit SOC codes to the 2018 6-digit hybrid SOCs that are used throughout JobsEQ. And the reason why we had to crosswalk the 2018 8-digit SOCs to the 2018 6-digit SOCs is because most occupation-related data that is publicly available is published at the 6-digit level. This is why we mostly use 6-digit SOCs throughout JobsEQ. And the reason why we're using hybrid SOC codes is because one of the primary surveys used in JobsEQ is called the Occupational Employment Statistics Survey. And this is a 3-year survey of employers that is published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And when the survey switched from using 2010 SOC codes to 2018 SOC codes, there was a need to wait an additional 3 years for them to collect enough data on the new SOC codes. So in the interim, they're using these hybrid SOCs until all the necessary data is collected. However, by next summer, all the data should be collected and there will no longer be a need to use these hybrid SOC codes. So that's something to look forward to in 2022. So we actually had to take an additional step here as well in crosswalking these 2018 8-digit SOCs into the 2018 6-digit hybrid SOCs. And that's because a 6-digit SOC code can be comprised of multiple 8-digit SOCs, some of which can be identified as green occupations and others that cannot. Thus, we had to come up with a rule to identify which 6-digit SOCs we would count as green jobs after we crosswalk the 8-digit SOCs. And the rule we came up, the rule or threshold we came up with to classify a 6-digit SOC as a green occupation was if only 20% or more of its 2019 job ads came from 8-digit SOCs that were identified as green occupations. So here in this slide, we're using the 6-digit hybrid SOC 11-3051 as an example. And we see in this first section here that it is comprised of 6 8-digit SOCs. So industrial production managers, quality control system managers, geothermal production managers, biofuels production managers, biomass power plant managers, hydroelectric production managers. So these are 6 8-digit SOCs that comprise or compose SOC 11-3051 here, which is a 6-digit SOC. And only 5 of these 6 8-digit SOCs were identified as green occupation. So we looked at the 2019 job ads and found that 52.5% of them came from these green occupations identified there, which was well above our 20% threshold, and thus we could classify the 6-digit SOC 11-3051 as a green occupation. And so that was basically our process for constructing the 2 green jobs occupation groups in JobsEQ. And most of the 6-digit SOCs green jobs ads percentages were well above 20%, with a lot of them having 100% green job ads. However, the next slide will show you some 8-digit SOCs that we had to exclude from the green jobs groups used in JobsEQ, because when we crosswalk them to the 6-digit SOC level, the total number of 2019 green jobs ads did not meet our threshold. So let me move that slide. But here are the SOCs that did not clear that 20% job post hurdle. And in the first column here, you have the 8-digit SOC that was identified as a green occupation, and there's a title there in the next column. But in the last column of the table, you'll see the 6-digit SOC that it was crosswalked to or connected to. And looking at this last column, basically, like I said, these 6-digit SOCs are comprised of multiple 8-digit SOCs, a lot of them not listed in this table here. So if I look at this example, solar energy installation managers. So it's crosswalked to this 6-digit SOC here, 47-1011. The title for that 6-digit SOC is First Line Supervisors of Construction Trades and Extraction Workers. And this 6-digit SOC is composed of 2 8-digit SOCs. One being Solar Energy Installation Managers, 47-1011.03, and the other being 47-1011.00, First Line Supervisors of Construction Trades and Extraction Workers. So those are the 2 8-digit SOCs that compose 47-1011 there. So when we look at the 2019 job ads between these 2 SOC codes, only 2% of the 2019 job ads were for solar energy installation managers. And the other 98% were for that 47-1011.00 First Line Supervisors of Construction Trades and Extraction Workers, which was not identified as a green occupation. Thus, we couldn't clear our 20% job posting hurdle there, and so we couldn't classify the 6-digit SOC 47-1011 as a green occupation and add it to the green occupation group in JobsEQ. So this is basically the process we use to create those 2 green job groups that you can search for in JobsEQ. All right. That's enough of sort of looking behind the hood and talking about how we defined and incorporated green jobs in JobsEQ. Now let's actually discuss how you look up data regarding green jobs in JobsEQ. So to reiterate, there are 2 green jobs occupation groups you can search for in JobsEQ. Green jobs total, green jobs requiring a high school degree or less. So one of the first things you can do is to go into the Data Explorer analytic within JobsEQ and chart historical employment growth. So here I created a chart where I indexed employment to 2010 quarter 3, and this chart sort of shows employment growth, national employment growth through there. And you can sort of see here that our two green jobs groups, green jobs total and green jobs requiring a high school degree, has actually outpaced the rate of growth rate of employment for non-green jobs here. So that is kind of an interesting trend to see there. The next thing I could do is use the maps analytic within JobsEQ to map the location quotient of green jobs for a region. So this map shows you the concentration of green jobs in each state and compares it to the national average. And surprisingly, some states like Indiana and Utah have a high concentration of green jobs as part of their regional economy versus other states like California or New York. However, the location quotient could be higher in those areas due to some of those green increased demand occupations we were viewing earlier, like customer service representatives and et cetera. So what might be a more informative map to create, so it might be more informative to create a map for a single green occupation. Let's say wind turbine service technicians. And here you can view the total employment amounts for this occupation in each state directly. And here you can see that California, Texas, and Florida have a high number of wind turbine service technicians. So this is another analysis you can perform in JobsEQ. Next, I would recommend looking up these two green job groups that I mentioned earlier in the Occupation Snapshot analytic that we have. And Occupation Snapshot is a great analytic to view current, historical, and projected occupation employment and data in a region. So in this slide, I filtered the occupation data that we have for the two green job groups and for the New York State region. I then sorted the table by which occupations were forecast to grow the most in the next 10 years. So this last column here in this table. And then here you see the top 5 occupations for each green job group. So looking at this data here, it looks like solar photovoltaic installers are both the highest green job group, or is projected to grow the highest growing green job occupation overall, and for green occupations that only require a high school degree or less. Another sort of interesting thing about this table is you can look at the mean wages for these mean annual wages for these 10 occupations. And sort of looking at these wages, you can see that they're all pretty high wage occupations, even the ones that were requiring just a high school degree or less, which is interesting. However, let's key in on one specific occupation, 49-9081, wind turbine service technician. So if we look at the total demand for new workers here, which factors in occupational exits, transfers, and employment growth, it looks like we're going to need 363 new wind turbine service technicians over the next 10 years in New York, which works out to about needing 36 new wind turbine service technicians on average each year. So over the next few slides, I'm going to show you how I would use JobsEQ to better define the labor supply and labor demand of an occupation in a region. And the example I will be using here will be wind turbine service technicians in New York. All right, so the first thing I would do on labor supply, so on the labor supply side, one of the first things I would do is to use our awards analytic to define the talent pipeline for wind turbine service technician. And the way this analytic is structured is that we use a crosswalk from the National Center of Education Statistics that basically connects occupations to what programs you get a post-secondary degree in, thus creating a talent pipeline for occupations based on what programs people are getting degrees in school. So in the first table on the slide, you see which programs we have identified as being associated with wind turbine service technicians in the New York State area. And so you can see that there's only one program connected to wind turbine service technicians, and that's industrial mechanics and maintenance technology here. And if we're looking at the 2018, we're looking at the 2018 to 2019 academic year, only one award was conferred for this program from schools in the New York State area. And the next table here, the second table, identifies schools that reported data for this program in the 2018 and 2019 academic year to the National Center of Education Statistics. And as we can see, only 2 schools located in the New York region reported data for this program, industrial mechanics and maintenance technology. And the only school that actually conferred a degree in this program up here in the 2018 to 2019 academic year was Fulton Montgomery Community College. So sort of just looking at this data here, it looks like there's an opportunity here to expand the talent pipeline for this occupation in New York. In terms of defining the labor supply a bit better for wind turbine service technicians in New York, the next step we could take, though, is to look at our resume forensics analytic. And this will allow us to look at the characteristics of people currently employed as wind turbine service technicians in New York. So we can see where folks were educated and sort of what they have studied other than, this program that we have listed here that we've identified in the awards analytic to become a wind turbine service technician. So before we begin, I should mention that the resume forensics is an add-on analytic for most JobsEQ licenses. So if you're interested in adding it to your license, please reach out to us. But so here in resume forensics, I can search the database of online resumes that we have in JobsEQ. Thus, I can filter for people whose last work experience on their resume was in New York and was as a wind turbine service technician. And based on those filters, our query returned 41 resumes in our database. And from these 41 resumes, we can view what schools they've attended, what award levels they have listed on their resume, what programs or areas of study that they have listed on their resume, and finally, even what hard skills they have listed on their resume. So looking at the data here, it looks like some of the people working as wind turbine service technicians in New York have attended school out of state. A lot of them have high school associate degrees and sort of other unspecified/other award levels listed on their resume. And they've studied things like technology or engineering and have experience in hard skills like maintenance, generators, wiring, and fabrication. So this sort of helps define the characteristics of a bit better of our existing labor pool of wind turbine service technicians in New York. The next thing we can do is sort of determine the labor demand for this occupation. And the way we could do that is by moving to our RTI analytic, which is our job posting database, to examine what specifically employers in New York State are requiring of wind turbine service technicians in their job ads. So before I begin this slide, I should mention that the RTI analytic, which stands for real-time intelligence, is also an add-on analytic for most JobsEQ licenses. So if you're interested in adding that to your license, please reach out to us. So just to give you a little bit of background information on how we create our job posting database in the RTI analytic. So we basically crawl the internet daily for online job posts or ads. And we download job posts from over 30,000 different sources. which includes job boards like Indeed, staffing company websites, and even individual companies' websites. We'll go to a company's website and download job posts from there. And once we have this, massive set of job posts, we then deduplicate them amongst each other, and that's sort of how we create our job posting database. So here, I filtered our job posting database for job ads that were posted in New York, were for wind turbine service technicians, and were for job posts that were active or posted in some point in the year 2020. So using that query, I have identified a total of 52 online job ads for wind turbine service technicians in New York in 2020. We can then group these 52 job posts by which metro area that they were posted in. So you can see that 14 of the 52 job posts were in that Albany, Schenectady metro area there. We can see which employers posted job ads. So here you can see a lot of job ads from GE and its subsidiaries there. Next, we can see the minimum education level being requested in the job post by the employer in the job ad. The programs that employers are asking applicants to have studied in school. And finally, the hard skills that employers are asking applicants to have experience with. And as we look at this hard skills table here, there's an interesting parallel between the job posting data that we're looking at right now, which is our labor demand, and the resume data that we were looking at in our previous slide, which is our sort of labor supply. And that is the mention of generators here. So you see this in our job posting data. A lot of job ads are asking applicants to have experience with generators. And if we flip back to our resume forensic slide here, you can see the mention of generators on a lot of resumes. So this is an example where it looks like our labor supply is matching what is being requested by the labor demand in this region. So that's kind of interesting. However, if we move back to this job posting slide, which is our labor demand slide, and we key in on the minimum education level being requested in the job posts here, it's curious to see that so many job posts, where the minimum education level being requested is a high school diploma. And this is interesting because the typical entry level education requirement for this occupation, wind turbine service technicians, is a post-secondary non-degree award, which is higher than a high school degree. So one thing you can do in RTI is actually look at an individual job post. So let's take a closer look at one of the job posts where the minimum education level being requested is a high school degree and sort of figure out what's going on here. So in this next slide, you see a job post for a wind technician from the company No Fossil Fuel here, located in Buffalo. And in the highlighted portion of the job post at the bottom, you can see where the employer requests applicants to have a minimum of a high school degree there. However, if you read further, you will see that the employer prefers applicants to have a technical associate's or bachelor's degree in power generation / renewables or some work experience. So this could possibly indicate that the labor demand for wind turbine service technician has sort of outpaced the labor supply, and thus employers have had to loosen the requirements that they sort of are demanding of applicants to find workers. That's going to be an interesting trend there, possible interesting trend. So to summarize all the data we've looked at so far in JobsEQ, in this example, it looks like there's not much of a talent pipeline for wind turbine service technicians in New York right now, and that this occupation is forecast to grow over the next 10 years at a relatively high level. Thus, if I worked in economic development in New York, this could be an area I could potentially focus on working with our community college partners in the region to expand training for. Otherwise, we would probably need to work to recruit people outside of the region to come and meet growing labor demand needs in this region for the specific occupation. All right. Now you've sort of seen how we've defined green jobs in JobsEQ and some of the ways you can find data in JobsEQ on green jobs using those 2 new green job occupation groups that we've added. Thank you. That sort of concludes my portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was great. A lot of information. So we do have some questions out there, and let me start with one. Thanks to Pam for her eagle eyes on slide 21. We referred to technologies to mitigate climate change under the Biden administration plan. It was 35 million. That's a typo. It should have been 35 billion. So we will have that changed on the deck before we send it out to you. And thanks again, Pam, for that. And then, Jonathan, you have a next question, something about the definition, but let me just make a comment before you answer that in particular. So this is similar to some other definitions where there is no common definition of green jobs. Different states have different definitions, and we've seen this happen in advanced manufacturing where there is no standard definition. We've seen it in technology where there is no definition of high technology industries. And we've even seen it in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, where some states then say STEM-H, adding healthcare to it. And some states say STEAM, adding arts to it. So again, no standard definition, but Jonathan, if you can look at your email and see question 1, and if there's anything that you can add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, Chris is exactly right. There is no standard definition of sort of how to define green jobs. Looking at that question and taking a look at that website real quickly, that Clean Jobs America website and how they define clean jobs. I was reading through the fact page, and it looks like they exclude, it's like the way they define clean jobs or green jobs is they exclude occupations that are not directly related to the energy sector. So that includes sort of outdoor industry, regenerative farming, oil well capping, recycling, conservation, environmental management. So like Chris said, there's many different ways to define green jobs. We use that sort of occupational greening concept used in that ONET study where we looked at how the green economy impacts green occupations.
Thanks, Jonathan. One other, I saw some people talking in the chat, and I don't know if Avery sent this as a question, but the 20% threshold, I'm sure we had a lot of debate on what threshold should we use. One participant said, I think I would prefer a 50% threshold. Can you give us some color on why we went with 20% and not something such as 50%?
Yeah, I think we sort of took a look at sort of what occupations would be excluded or not excluded, and sort of looked at sort of different trends overall. And we found, I think we sort of determined that 20% was sort of the best threshold that really captured green job data, sort of made sure it captured the different stocks that would be included as, or sort of were identified as green occupations. Mm-hmm. And like I said, for the most part, a lot of the job ads were well above 20%. And like for a majority of them were sort of at 100% green job ads, mm-hmm. based on the data that was in our RTI job posting database.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jonathan. I know we're at the 1 o'clock hour, and we're happy to stay online to continue to answer questions. Some of you probably have a hard stop at 1. So once again, happy Earth Day. Please go out, plant a tree, or if you're in an apartment, consider adding a few herbs to your apartment in some clay pots to celebrate Earth Day today. And so with that, again, thank you for attending. And Avery, if you can let us know of any additional questions that are still out there, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, I sent questions 3. So I'll just read the first one. Jonathan, can we look at the growth of specific green 8-digit SOCs, not just 6-digit SOCs in JobsEQ?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like I mentioned, most of the publicly available data that is released is at the 6-digit SOC code level. And that's sort of what is used mostly throughout JobsEQ. There are a few places where you can look at 8-digit SOC code data. One of them being resume forensics, that resume forensics analytic, which I showed you, and the RTI data, or job posting data. And there you could see sort of the changes in job postings over time in each year. So that's like the RTI analytic could be a great place to sort of look at sort of those 8-digit SOCs and sort of see how the number of job postings for specific SOC codes have changed over time.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second question is, you mentioned the 12 groups in the green economy. Can we look those up in JobsEQ?
There's not a direct, you can't sort of plug in that search term necessarily within JobsEQ, and I'm not sure they actually identified in the study which NAICS codes, which are industry codes, those 12 different sectors consist of, but you can create custom industry groups within JobsEQ. So if you wanted to, you could find, based on sort of your reading of the definition, you could create custom industry groups for those different 12 sectors. And maybe that's something that's something I'll mark down as a future request, and we can have our dev team look at possibly adding that as an industry group that you could search for within JobsEQ.
Great. Do you have any plans to, I guess, update the career ladders in JobsEQ to help make the connection to new green jobs?
No firm plans to do that right now, but as I say, we're always looking at new ways to improve JobsEQ and taking requests. So I will mark that down as a future request, and our dev team can look at maybe possibly adding that in the future into JobsEQ.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we also have, this is Hot Seat with Jonathan. I love it. Can you speak to crosswalking these green job occupational codes to industries? Are all sectors now divided into green and non-green subsectors, or how can we do this with industries? Yeah,
and that's a question we get a lot of in terms of connecting occupations to industries and making those connections. We do have an analytic within JobsEQ called the Industry Occupation Analytic, Industry Occupation Mix Analytic, that basically tells you sort of which which industries occupations commonly work in within your region, or it sort of tells you which, like I said, tells you the employment for different occupations, the industry employment for different occupations in your region. So you could use that to connect which industries these occupations work in. But, a single occupation, like you take accountants, for example, they work in a variety of different industries. So, that's sort of the difficulty of mapping occupations to specific industries. Occupations work in a variety of different industries. But speaking to that ONET study, and sorry, my answer is going a little bit long here, but that ONET study actually, in the tables that's provided there, tells you sort of which sector of the green economy each of those green occupations were identified as being in. So long story short, you could look at the ONET study, identify which sector of the green economy that green occupation belongs to, and sort of create custom industry groups that way. But in JobsEQ, you can go to the industry occupation mix analytic, type in an occupation, and see which industries that occupation works in your region.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we also had someone say, can't imagine that it would be easy to do this occupation to industry crosswalk because it's super complex. So we have a few people saying, great, it's great that these like occupation groups are added to JobsEQ. How can they get a list of all of the SOC codes in those groups?
Yeah, so at the 6-digit level, if you want to see all the all the 6-digit SOCs that are contained within those 2 green jobs occupation groups, all you need to do is to just go to Occupation Snapshot and type in one of those green jobs occupation groups, so green jobs total, for example, and switch the SOC code level to 6 digits. And then the table will populate with all the 6-digit SOC codes that we've identified as being in those green jobs occupation groups. If you want to look at the raw data, then like I said, I recommended earlier, look up the study that's published on ONAT, and the tables in the appendix of the study list all the green occupation, all the 8-digit SOCs that were identified as green occupations.
Okay, great. So, but you can see the 6-digit right there in JobsEQ.
Yes, exactly. You can see the 6-digit SOCs right in JobsEQ. Just go to Occupation Snapshot and hit the make everything at the 6-digit SOC code level, and you can see all the 6-digit SOCs that compose those green job groups.
Great. I see Rory is giving a helpful instructions in the chat. So thanks, Rory. We love people getting involved. One question that actually was from Rory. On one of the maps slides, Jonathan, you were saying, I think it was the location quotient one. You said something about which jobs were outpacing others. Do you remember which jobs were outpacing the others?
Let me pull up that slide real quick. I think it was this chart here, maybe, where I was talking about the growth in the 2 green jobs groups we have were outpacing the non-green jobs. So all the SOCs that weren't included in this total green jobs or this non-green jobs group here. And so when you index the data to 2010, you can see that at the beginning of 2020, green jobs had grown at about 24.6%, while non-green jobs had grown at 12.3%.
Oh, great. That's a great visual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then here's the location quotient map, which I'm not sure if it speaks to his question exactly.
Okay. That is all the questions that we have for now. And everyone, later today, you will get an email with the slides and the recording of this presentation. So don't worry, it will come to you. Chris, do you want to give us a final word before we sign off?
Sure. Thanks again for attending, and we're going to continue to do these webinars as long as you find them useful, and feel free to send us either through your account manager or through Avery some topics that you'd like to see us talk about. So again, happy Earth Day, and please go out and plant something to celebrate. Have a good afternoon and be safe.